That evening, snow had begun falling early, blanketing rooftops, quiet streets, and the dim street lamp that flickered near the gate of a large brick house. Inside, the Thomas family was busy preparing Christmas dinner. Children's laughter drifted from the living room, mixing with the soft clatter of pots and pans in the kitchen. A tall Christmas tree stood proudly by the window, draped in twinkling lights, with colourful boxes stacked neatly beneath its branches. Thomas stood by the fireplace, gently resting a hand on his wife Claire's shoulder. They had worked tirelessly all year, and tonight felt like the reward. A warm, perfect Christmas Eve for their 3 little children. In their hearts, they wished only for this warmth to stay within these walls forever. But as Thomas glanced through the large front window toward the snow-covered yard, he noticed a figure. A small, hunched silhouette, white hair peeking out beneath a worn knitted hat, stood pressed against the gate, nearly swallowed by the night and the drifting snow. She didn't move, yet her eyes seemed to glimmer with something fragile and quietly desperate. Thomas frowned. Claire followed his gaze, her voice gentle. "What is it, darling?" He stayed silent for a moment, exhaling slowly, eyes still fixed on that lone figure. Behind him, the fireplace crackled, filling the room with the hush of warmth and flame, while outside, the snow kept falling, cold and heavy, carrying no wishes and no carols for those left in the dark. Thomas stayed by the window longer than he meant to, his breath fogging the glass as he watched the woman outside. She hadn't moved. The snow gathered on her shoulders, clinging to the worn fabric of her coat, turning her into a silent statue. Claire came closer, wrapping her shawl tighter around herself, even though the room was warm. "Thomas," she whispered, "maybe she's just resting. Maybe she'll go." Thomas shook his head, eyes soft but troubled. "It's Christmas Eve, Claire. No one should be out there tonight." Behind them, their oldest son, Peter, about 10, peeked around the hallway. He followed his father's gaze and squinted at the window. "Is someone outside?" he asked. Claire rested her hand on Peter's hair, smoothing it down. "It's just someone passing by, sweetheart." But Peter didn't look away. He pressed his small hand against the cold window, as if trying to reach the lonely shape on the other side. For a moment, the warmth inside felt too bright, too safe, while just inches away, on the other side of glass and bricks, a human soul was freezing. Thomas stepped away from the fireplace and picked up his coat from the rack. Claire grabbed his arm, voice trembling. "Are you really going to invite her in? Thomas, we don't know her. She could be dangerous." He looked at his wife, then at their children now gathered near the hallway, their eyes wide, hearing every word. "Claire," he said softly, "what's the point of this warmth if we can't share it, even for one night? Look at them. What will they remember when they grow up? That we closed our door, or that we opened it when it mattered most?" Claire's eyes glistened. She turned to their youngest, little Sophie, who hugged her teddy bear tight. Sophie looked up, voice small but clear. "Mummy, maybe she's hungry." Silence fell over the room, heavier than any snow outside. Claire let out a long breath, nodded slowly, and touched Thomas's hand. "Then open the door," she said, her voice breaking into something tender and brave. "Let's bring her in." Thomas looked at his children one last time, then stepped to the door. The handle felt cold against his palm. He knew this moment, this simple turning of a knob, would live in their hearts longer than any wrapped gift under the tree. And so, with a deep breath, he opened the door, and the warmth spilled out into the night. The door creaked open, and for a heartbeat, winter came rushing in. A swirl of snowflakes drifted onto the doormat, carried by the sharp bite of the wind. The children huddled closer together, eyes wide, their breath caught in their chests. The woman didn't move at first. She stood at the threshold, her frail figure framed by the darkness behind her. Snow clung stubbornly to her coat and hair, turning her almost ghost-like. An echo of someone who hadn't felt a warm room in years. Thomas stepped forward, his voice gentle, almost pleading. "Mum, please come in, it's warm here." She looked up, and her eyes, 2 pools of grey, tired and searching, met his. For a moment they flickered with doubt. She glanced past him, to where Claire stood with Sophie in her arms, to where Peter and the twins peeked out from behind the hallway wall. Then, slowly, she lifted a trembling hand and clutched the edge of the doorframe, like a swimmer reaching for a lifeline above icy water. She stepped inside, Just one step and the door closed behind her, cutting off the howling wind. Warmth wrapped around her like a blanket she'd forgotten could exist. The scent of roasted meat, fresh bread, and something sweet, apples maybe, drifted over to her, making her eyes well up. Sophie, the littlest one, wiggled out of Claire's arms and toddled closer, clutching her teddy bear by one ear. She tilted her head up, looking at the stranger with wide-eyed curiosity. "Hi," Sophie said softly, her voice like a tiny bell in the hush of the room. "You can have dinner with us, okay?" The woman let out a shaky sound, half laugh, half sob, and knelt slowly so she could look Sophie in the eye. Her gloved hand, fingerless and frayed, reached out, but she didn't touch the child. Instead, she pressed that hand to her own chest, as if to hold her heart in place. She whispered words so quiet they were almost swallowed by the crackling fire. "Thank you, little one." Claire watched, her throat tight. She felt Thomas's hand slip into hers. In that moment, every gift under the tree, every string of lights seemed pale compared to this single, fragile kindness. And so, on a night when the world outside was frozen and still, a stranger stepped inside, bringing with her a story that none of them could yet see, a story that would live on far longer than any Christmas snow. Thomas led the woman closer to the dining table, his hand steady on her back, light enough to be gentle, firm enough to remind her she belonged there, even if just for tonight. Claire hurried to the kitchen, pulling out an extra plate, a chipped one they hadn't used in years. She wiped it clean with the corner of her apron, her fingers trembling a little as she set it down beside the roasted meat and the bowls of steaming vegetables. The children watched every move, their eyes wide with a mixture of wonder and a softness they didn't yet have words for. To them, Christmas had always been presents and songs and laughter, but tonight it was something else, something bigger. The woman sank into the chair like someone who hadn't sat at a real table for decades. Her shoulders hunched at first, as if expecting to be scolded for taking up space. But no one did. Instead, Thomas carved an extra slice of roast and laid it on her plate, then passed the bread basket to her before anyone else. Claire poured her a cup of warm cider, the sweet scent of cinnamon drifting between them. She caught the woman's eyes, still wet, still shining, and managed a small, real smile. "You're safe here," Claire said softly. "Eat as much as you want." For a moment, the woman just stared at the food, steam curling up, carrying memories of kitchens she'd once known, of family tables long gone. She picked up her fork with hands that shook so badly she nearly dropped it. But she steadied herself and tasted the first bite. The flavours bloomed on her tongue. Simple potatoes, savoury gravy, bread warm enough to chase the cold from her bones. She closed her eyes and a single tear slid down her cheek. It was Peter who broke the hush. He leaned forward across the table, his small voice clear. "Merry Christmas, Ma'am." The woman's eyes flew open. She looked at him, this boy with hair still messy from playing by the tree, and saw in his shy smile something she hadn't felt in years. She was welcome. Sophie echoed him, her little chin barely clearing the edge of the table. "Merry Christmas!" The woman tried to answer, but the words stuck in her throat. She looked around the table, at Claire, who nodded softly, at Thomas, who raised his glass with a grateful smile, and in that moment she found her voice again. "Merry Christmas," she whispered back, "to all of you." Outside the window the snow kept falling, thick and gentle. But in this warm room, one stranger's heart began to thaw, one bite, one smile, one Merry Christmas at a time. After the plates had been passed around twice more, and the children's giggles faded into the soft crackle of the fireplace, a hush settled over the table. The woman, who still hadn't spoken much, sat back in her chair, both hands cupped around her warm cider as if she feared it might slip away. Thomas leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his voice gentle but curious. "Do you have somewhere to go after this, somewhere warm?" The woman's gaze drifted to the window, where snow pressed against the glass, like a reminder of every night she'd spent alone. She hesitated, the words lodged deep in her chest. Then Sophie, her tiny face earnest and unafraid, reached across the table with her chubby fingers and brushed the back of the woman's hand. That small touch unlocked something. The woman swallowed hard, her voice rasped from years of silence. Once, I had a house like this, not as big, but warm, a kitchen with smells like this one, a husband, a daughter about her age. Her eyes dropped to Sophie, who tilted her head and smiled as if she understood more than her years allowed. But then, things changed. My husband got sick. The bills came faster than we could pay. One winter... She paused, pressing her hand to her lips to catch the tremor. I lost them both, and the house too. No one moved. The only sound was the faint crackle of the fire and the heartbeat of the room, steady but fragile. She took a shaky breath, as if the memory itself were made of ice that might splinter if she touched it too roughly. After that, I wandered. I did odd jobs, slept in shelters when I could. Some nights I didn't sleep at all. She gave a small, hollow laugh. Christmas was just another cold night to survive. Claire's eyes welled up. She reached out and laid her hand on the woman's wrist, a quiet promise that tonight was different. The woman looked around the table. She saw the worried crease on Thomas's brow, the flicker of sadness in Peter's eyes, the innocent trust shining in Sophie's face. And something inside her, something buried under years of snow and silence, stirred awake. She whispered, voice small but clearer than before. Thank you for letting me sit here, for letting me feel like a mother at a table again, just for tonight. No one needed to say anything more. Claire squeezed her hand. Thomas nodded as if to promise her, tonight you are not alone. Outside the wind howled but could not touch them. Inside the warmth held fast, wrapping itself around a stranger's old wounds, slowly knitting them back together, one heartbeat at a time. The plates were nearly empty now, crumbs of bread scattered beside the glowing candles. The children leaned sleepily against each other, their eyelids drooping with the comfort of full bellies and the soft hum of the fireplace. The woman, this stranger whose name they still didn't know, looked at them with a warmth that made her heart ache. She had long forgotten what it felt like to watch a child drift off to sleep in a room that smelled of cinnamon and wood smoke. Thomas cleared his throat gently, breaking the quiet. He glanced at Claire, who gave him a small nod, an unspoken yes. "Ma'am," he said softly, his voice careful but certain, "you don't have to go back out there tonight." The woman looked up, startled. Her eyes flicked toward the door, then back to Thomas's kind face. "But you've done enough," she said, her voice cracking with the weight of gratitude and disbelief. I don't want to trouble you more." Claire leaned forward, resting her hand over the woman's, warm and firm. "It's no trouble, there's a small guest room upstairs. It's not much. An old quilt, a bed that squeaks when you turn over, but it's warm. It's yours tonight." The woman's lips trembled. She looked down at her weathered hands, fingers raw from too many winters spent clutching scraps of cardboard. Too many nights bracing herself against walls and wind. Little Sophie, half asleep, stirred in her mother's lap and mumbled drowsily, "Don't go back to the cold lady, you can stay here with us." That tiny voice was more than enough to crumble the last wall inside her. Tears welled up, spilling faster than she could hide them. She pressed both hands to her chest, trying to hold the feeling in place, this fragile, impossible warmth. I don't know what to say," she whispered. Thomas squeezed her shoulder, his eyes steady and kind. "Say you'll stay," he said. "That's all we want tonight." She nodded, too choked up to speak, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs that didn't feel like shame this time, but like relief. For one night, the world's bitterness stayed outside the door. The storm could rattle the windows, pile snow on the porch, whisper cold threats through the cracks. But inside this house, one stranger would sleep under a roof that felt like a promise: you are not forgotten. And though none of them knew it yet, this promise would not fade with the dawn. It would live on, tucked away in her heart, waiting for a day when she could open her own door to someone in need and say, "Come in, you are safe here." Dawn came slowly, pale and quiet, slipping through the edges of the heavy curtains. The storm had calmed in the night, leaving behind a world blanketed in fresh snow that sparkled like tiny stars scattered across the yard. Downstairs, the house was still, warm embers glowing softly in the fireplace. Thomas was the first to wake. He found himself drawn to the guest room door at the end of the hallway. He knocked gently, no answer. He pushed the door open just enough to peek inside. The quilt was folded neatly at the foot of the bed, the pillow fluffed and untouched by any trace of restlessness. She was gone. A small weight settled in his chest. He'd hoped, somehow, that she might stay a bit longer, but she had left quietly, like a drifting snowflake, fragile, fleeting. On the nightstand, a scrap of paper lay under a smooth riverstone from the garden. The paper was torn from an old notebook, its edges soft and frayed. The words were written in shaky letters, each one pressed deep as if she'd wanted them to last. Thomas picked it up and read in the hush of the morning light. To this family, thank you for the warm bed, the warm meal, and the warm hearts. You gave me more than shelter. You gave me a reason to believe that good people still exist. I will never forget this Christmas. Someday, if I can, I promise I will pass this kindness on. M. Claire appeared behind him, pulling her robe tight around her shoulders. She read the note over his arm, her eyes soft with the sting of unshed tears. She didn't even tell us her name, Claire whispered. Thomas brushed his thumb over the faded pencil marks, as if he could feel her gratitude in each letter. She left us something better, he said quietly. A promise. From down the hall came the soft padding of bare feet. Little Sophie peeked in, hair tousled from sleep. Is the snow lady gone? She asked, rubbing her eyes. Claire knelt and pulled Sophie close. She is, sweetheart, but she's warm now, somewhere safe. They stood together in the morning stillness, a small family holding a slip of paper that felt bigger than any gift they had opened the night before. Outside, the sun climbed higher, turning the snow to gold. And somewhere beyond their door, a woman carried that night with her, tucked deep against her heart, waiting for the day she could keep her promise. Years passed, swift as seasons turning pages no one could hold still. The children grew. Peter went off to college, the twins found jobs, Sophie, the youngest, blossomed into a young woman with her mother's kind eyes and her father's steady hands. The family house aged too, its bricks weathered by wind and rain, but its heart never dimmed. The fireplace that once crackled on that Christmas Eve still warmed winter nights, though the laughter around it had grown quieter as the children chased their own dreams. But life, as it often does, turned without mercy. An unexpected collapse in Thomas's business pulled the rug out from under their steady life. Debts piled like snowdrifts outside their door, silent, suffocating. The warmth they once gave so freely now flickered, threatened by notices tacked to the mailbox and calls that went unanswered. One night, Thomas sat alone at the same dining table where they'd once carved that extra slice of roast. He stared at a stack of unpaid bills, fingers rubbing the bridge of his nose. Claire joined him, carrying 2 mugs of tea neither of them would finish. We'll lose the house, Thomas said, voice hoarse from nights awake. We've tried everything. No one wants to risk helping a family that can't repay. Claire reached across, covering his hand with hers. She didn't say, "It will be all right." They were too honest for hollow comfort now. From the living room, Sophie's voice floated in, grown but still carrying that soft lilt that once told a stranger, "Don't go back to the cold lady. You can stay here with us." Claire's eyes drifted to the mantel, where a small, faded piece of paper sat framed behind the glass. The note. The promise. They had kept it all these years, not because they expected anything in return, but because it reminded them who they were at their best. Thomas followed her gaze, and a fragile smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. It was just one night, he murmured half to himself. One meal. And it changed her life, Claire whispered, her fingers tracing the edge of the mug. Maybe it still means something, somewhere. Outside, rain drummed softly on the windows. The world felt impossibly wide and empty. Yet, deep down, some tiny part of them, tired but not yet broken, still wondered if kindness, once given, really does find its way home. And far away, in an office lit by the warm glow of a single lamp, a woman with silver-streaked hair sat at her desk. She glanced at an old photograph of a snow-covered house, a note in her hand, creased at the folds from being opened too many times. She picked up her pen, heart steady, and began to write a letter that would find its way back to the very family who once saved her from a winter's night. It arrived on an ordinary morning, grey and drizzling, the kind of rain that made the mailbox creak when Thomas opened it. He expected another notice, another envelope with red ink shouting reminders of what they owed. But instead, tucked between the cold metal, was a single cream-coloured envelope, No company logo, just their family name, handwritten in a delicate looping script. Thomas turned it over in his palm, his breath catching at the unfamiliar return address. Inside, the house was quiet. He stepped back into the kitchen, where Claire sat tracing numbers in her worn ledger, each digit heavier than the last. "Another bill?" she asked, not looking up. He shook his head, slipping a finger under the flap. The paper inside was thick, the kind of paper meant for something real, something you hold on to. He read the first line, then sat down hard, the chair scraping against the floor. "What is it, Thomas?" He passed the letter to Claire with trembling hands. The letter read, "Dear Thomas and Claire, you may not remember me. Years ago, on a night when the world was cold and I had nowhere to go, you opened your door. You gave me warmth, food and hope when I had none left. That one meal became my first step back into life. I found work, then built a small cafe that grew into something more. Every day since, I've kept the promise I scribbled on that scrap of paper you saved, to pass your kindness on. Now I hear you're in trouble. Life has a way of circling back. This time, let me open my door to you. Enclosed is an invitation. Please come visit my office. I have something for you, not just money, but a chance to begin again. With all my gratitude, Margaret." Claire's eyes blurred with tears before she could finish the last line. She pressed the letter to her chest, her shoulders shaking, not just with relief, but with the weight of knowing that a single good deed, done without expectation, could return like this. Sophie appeared in the doorway, now grown, yet still carrying that spark of childhood wonder in her eyes. "Mum, Dad, what's wrong?" Thomas looked up at his daughter, then over at the note still framed above the mantel, Margaret's promise from long ago. He smiled, weary but real, as if a heavy door inside him had cracked open just enough to let hope back in. "Do you remember, Sophie, the snow lady we let in when you were little?" Sophie nodded, her eyes wide. "She stayed here for Christmas." Claire brushed a tear from her cheek, her voice a whisper. "She's coming home to us now, in her own way." Outside, the rain fell softer, washing the grime from the garden path, and for the first time in months, the house didn't feel so heavy. The promise they'd once given away so freely was finding its way back, carrying the warmth of that long-ago night through the cracks of their struggles, reminding them that what you give, you never truly lose. They arrived at the address written so carefully at the bottom of that letter, a small but elegant brick building tucked behind a garden blooming with late spring flowers. The sign out front read, "Margaret's Hearth and Home Foundation." Below it, in smaller letters, "Everyone deserves warmth." Thomas paused at the steps, Claire's arm linked through his. Sophie stood beside them, her eyes shining with a hope that felt almost childlike again. Inside, the air smelled faintly of bread and coffee, and somewhere down the hall, laughter drifted from an open door. A young woman in a warm sweater greeted them, her smile familiar somehow, as if she already knew their story. "She's been waiting for you," the woman said softly, leading them down the hallway. They entered a sunlit office, walls lined with photographs, children hugging stuffed animals, families seated at long wooden tables, strangers becoming friends over shared meals. And in the middle of it all stood Margaret. She turned, silver hair pulled back neatly, eyes as clear and kind as they'd been that night years ago when she'd clutched a cup of warm cider like a lifeline. The moment she saw Thomas and Claire, her face broke into a smile that trembled at the edges. Without a word, she crossed the room and pulled Claire into a hug, then Thomas, then Sophie. It was the kind of embrace that melted years and hardships like snow under a rising sun. "You saved me," Margaret whispered against Claire's shoulder. "You didn't even know me. You just opened your door." Claire's eyes brimmed. "And you kept your promise. You built all this." Margaret stepped back, gesturing to the photographs on the wall. "This foundation helps people like I once was. Lost, cold, forgotten. A place to sit, a meal to share, a door that doesn't close. You gave me that when I needed it most." She turned, her eyes locking with Thomas's, strong and steady. "Now it's my turn. I've arranged everything. Your debt's cleared, the house saved. And more than that, I want you to be part of this. Help me run this place. Teach people what you taught me, that one meal, one warm bed can change everything." Thomas tried to speak, but his voice cracked under the weight of all the years between then and now. He just nodded, pulling Claire close as Sophie slipped her hand into Margaret's. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, scattering gold across the garden. A breeze carried the scent of hope through the open door, and in that moment they all stood there together, no longer a family who had once given and lost, or a woman who had once received and wandered alone. They were a circle now, kindness given, kindness returned, a promise kept. Years ago, a stranger stood shivering in the snow, waiting for someone to notice. One meal, one open door, and a single piece of paper had turned that winter night into something larger than all of them. And now, that warmth would keep spreading, one meal at a time. Personal reflection. What makes this story special is its quiet simplicity. It doesn't begin with a grand miracle, just a single, warm meal on a cold night. For most of us, dinner is ordinary, almost forgettable. But for someone with nothing, that meal can become a spark of hope, strong enough to change everything. What stays with me is how this family opened their door with no promise of a return. They didn't expect to be repaid. They simply believed warmth should be shared, especially when it's needed most. And the woman they welcomed in, Margaret, carried that warmth with her. She didn't let it die out. Instead, she protected it, nurtured it, and one day gave it back in ways the family could never have imagined. It's like a single candle flame. When shared, it doesn't go out. It grows, lighting more lives than we ever see. Lessons to remember: 1. Kindness given is never truly lost. It may disappear into the quiet for years, but when we need it most, it can find its way back to us in the most unexpected ways. 2. Sometimes what people need isn't just money or food, it's the feeling that they are not invisible. A warm meal, a place at the table, a simple Merry Christmas can thaw a heart frozen by loneliness. 3. Plant your seeds of kindness, even when you can't see where they'll grow. One night, one door opened, gave a woman the courage to rebuild her life. And in time, that courage brought a family back from the edge of losing everything. 4. We all need each other, especially when we feel weakest. One day you may be the person standing outside in the snow waiting for someone to notice. And one day you may be the one who opens your door. One meal can change a life, not because of what's on the plate, but because of the love around it. If you ever have the chance to open your door to someone, do it, because sometimes that open door is what saves you too. If this story touched you, I hope you keep a piece of it somewhere inside your heart. And whenever you feel ready for another story, Rain Inside will be right here, waiting to share moments of warmth, moments that remind us how kindness can echo far beyond what we see. See you again in the next story. And maybe someday you'll open your own door for someone who needs it most.